President Donald Trump this weekend denigrated special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation of alleged collusion between his presidential campaign and Russia, saying all of Mueller's efforts prove no collusion ever took place. According to President Trump, after 2 years and millions of pages of documents, and at a cost of over $30 million of American taxpayers' money, no collusion. This collusion illusion, there is no smoking gun. At this late date, after all that we have gone through, after millions have been spent, we have no Russian collusion. There is nothing impeachable at all. President Trump's comments come one day after Mueller's release of a memo in connection with the upcoming sentencing of Michael Cohen, Trump's former personal attorney, who has cooperated with Mueller's investigation. Cohen provided useful information about the probe according to Mueller. In Cohen's specific document, Mueller said that Cohen was involved in conversations pertaining to possible meetings between then-candidate Trump and Russian officials, including Russian leader Vladimir Putin. You noticed I said pertaining to possible meetings. There's never really any evidence, ladies and gentlemen. It's always just conjecture. According to Robert Mueller, contact between Cohen and a Russian official did take place on November of 2015. On the other side of Washington, D.C., always and also attacking President Trump, the FBI had not verified any of the claims in a dossier alleging that there were connections between the Trump campaign and Russia before it began investigating the campaign. Former FBI Director James Comey admitted this week. Comey was questioned behind closed doors by the House Judiciary Committee again and House Government Oversight Committee. The dossier was conveniently used by the FBI as its evidence that it needed to conduct surveillance on former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. However, in response to a question from Republican Congressman Trey Gowdy of South Carolina, they stated that as of the time of the FBI's receiving permission to conduct surveillance on Page, the dossier had not been verified and that no efforts to verify the dossier was still being conducted several months after surveillance began. So inevitably, ladies and gentlemen, Comey said he could not remember key details conveniently. For example, according to the transcript, Comey could not recall how Christopher Steele, who compiled the dossier, gave it to the FBI in the first place. Comey's statement verified that he had some recollection that he had passed it on to an agent that he knew and that the agent sent it to the headquarters. I think that's the way in which it reached the counterintelligence division, but I don't remember the specifics on that, unquote. Inevitably, the transcript shows that Gowdy became increasingly frustrated with Comey's responses, finally asking, "I'm going to ask you whether hearsay is ordinarily admissible in court or not. Is it a quiz?" Comey replied, "It's just utterly ridiculous, ladies and gentlemen."
Bombshell of epic proportions. Robert Mueller finally revealing some of his evidence in filings against Michael Cohen and Paul Manafort, and clearly implicating the president. It was, according to Trump defenders, basically a dud. Hush money payments involving alleged affairs, but very little material on Russian collusion. And Donald Trump's reaction? Totally clears the president. Thank you. Earlier, there'd been a day-long media buildup until prosecutors finally filed their sentencing memo for Mike Flynn, and you could see the sense of deflation when there were no new revelations, and Robert Mueller said the ex-National Security Advisor shouldn't go to jail.
Like everybody else, I was frustrated and sort of said, really, when I first looked at it, because it's so redacted.
The frustrating part of this, for those of us who are interested in the case, is that the core of his cooperation is blacked out.
I think this is a big zero. I think this Mueller thing and what they did to Flynn is disgusting.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist and a Fox News contributor. Sarah Fisher, media reporter for Axios. and Richard Fowler, a radio talk show host and also a Fox News contributor. Molly, we learned a few new details from these sentencing memos, such as that Michael Cohen was contacted by a Russian national in 2015 who said he could offer political synergy at the government level and wanted to set up a Trump-Putin meeting, which of course didn't happen. Do these and other details warrant the media's DEFCON 1 coverage?
Well, first off, on that detail, that was, I think, a wrestler who had reached out to Michael Cohen, and Cohen didn't respond to that offer of help from a wrestler who in Russia. So sometimes when these things are written up, they're written in very dramatic style, and if you dig into them, there isn't a lot there. And I think this is very important from a media coverage angle. There have been these two competing theories about the Mueller investigation. One is that there really was treasonous collusion with Russia to steal an election, or at least very good reason for thinking so. And that explains why the Department of Justice and FBI did so many things that you would normally not see: spying on a campaign, running informants, having wiretaps. The other theory was that this is actually just kind of a witch hunt. This is an attempt to bring down Trump through any means possible. So when you get plea agreements that have nothing to do with Russia, Michael Cohen was being looked into because our government believed that he was the central linchpin, that he'd gone to Prague and met with Russians. Nothing in these documents say any of that thing. So when you have this, when you have the evidence supporting this other theory that this isn't a legitimate investigation but just a political means to get rid of Trump, I think that needs to be part of the conversation as well.
Richard, there were two prosecution memos on Cohen. The Mueller's office called for leniency, but the Manhattan U.S. Attorney's Office called for a substantial jail term and said that Trump directed the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal before the election to cover that up, and that's damaging. But based on Michael Cohen's account, didn't everyone in America basically know that?
Well, I think it depends on which voter you're asking and which American you're asking. I think there's a couple things that we find out from many of these documents. One, we know that there's still more work to be done by Mueller and his team. A lot of it is redacted. So we actually don't know if there was or if there wasn't Russian collusion, because it could be in the blacked out parts of the memos or the parts of the memo that are currently under seal. But what we do know, and I think it's very important that we do know this, is that the President of the United States asked his lawyer to pay off a porn star and a Playboy playmate. And for a party that, says that they have the moral high ground, that is problematic, and I think it is important for the media to cover that.
I agree that it's important. We've covered it all along, not as a tabloid story, but as a money trail story. But it's not Russian collusion. Let me just ask you this, Sarah, before we move on, because there's been nonstop coverage of all this Mueller stuff this week. What got lost is that Trump nominated William Barr, President Bush 41's Attorney General, to come back and run the Justice Department. Given all the criticism of the acting Attorney General, Matt Whitaker, who had criticized Mueller, I don't see the press giving Trump a whole lot of credit for picking a guy who's well qualified and not a crony.
Who's lauded by Washington officials as someone who can be trusted in this position. I think that it's been largely skipped over because it's not the biggest and most controversial story of the week.
Or does it not support the media narrative that Trump is trying to squelch the Mueller
and undermine the investigation? Exactly right.
So let's turn to the media coverage of the Paul Manafort memo. It says that the prosecutors say Manafort told repeated and discernible lies, even while he was supposedly cooperating with the special counsel's office, and including about a meeting with a business colleague in Ukraine said to have ties to Russian intelligence. Is that a significant story?
I'm not sure, and I mean, Paul Manafort has his own trouble, and he seems to have made poor decisions while he's under surveillance.
He's got credibility problems, to say the least. Again,
this is another one of these people who's supposed to be a central figure that shows us that there was this collusion between Russia and Trump to steal the election that rightly belonged to Hillary Clinton.
Right.
He's been investigated to an inch of his life, and we still don't have any evidence of Russia collusion. Some people are willing to wait for years, decades, whatever it takes, but other people might think, gee, this really doesn't seem like they really had legitimate reason to be worried about Russia collusion.
Right, there was nothing.
And there was an interesting story this week that came out of CNN where some of the principals involved in setting up the special counsel, they say they didn't believe there was Russia collusion. By that point, they knew that wasn't true. But they were seeking to rein in the president. That is a very surprising admission, and that is very problematic for people who want to have the Russia collusion investigation have credibility.
Richard, particularly in the case of Mike Flynn, the former national security advisor, but others too, what do you make of some conservative commentators, including here on Fox, saying, well, lying to investigators is basically a process crime, there's no underlying crime, and therefore it's not that big a deal?
Well, so in the Mike Flynn case in particular, I think he has to be held to a higher standard for a couple of reasons. Number one, he was a 3-star general. Number two, he had the job, and he was going for the job to be the national security advisor to the President of the United States of America, which is one of the highest positions in our government. And not only did he lie to the FBI, but he also lied to the Vice President. So it's disheartening to me.
He did a whole lot of lying.
Yeah, but it's disheartening to me to see conservative commentators defend somebody and say, oh, it's a mistake, when he lied to the person, to our Vice President and the President. That's problematic, and he belongs behind bars for that.
And it might have been different if this had been Democrats accused of lying.
I think if it was a Democrat, they'd belong behind bars too.
It's a big deal to me because it's at the heart of our law enforcement system.
People should not lie to federal authorities. That's absolutely true. It is also true that the investigation itself produced these crimes. Here's another crime that happened related to Mike Flynn. Someone in the Obama administration made a criminal leak of that phone call. I don't even know if it's been investigated. Certainly no one has been held accountable. That was one of the 3 leaks of information that really set up the Russia hysteria that a lot of people fell for. None of them have been investigated. Nobody's been held accountable.
I'm going to push back on that point for a second. I mean, just to say that if it weren't for this investigation, then he wouldn't have committed a crime, he just shouldn't have committed the crime.
Thank you.
That's true. But if the investigation is producing its own crimes, that's not very American.
So, but a lot of people, go ahead.
People are expecting, people were promised treasonous collusion with Russia. They're not getting anything.
But Molly, here's the point. The point is, it's not that he called the ambassador. It's the fact that he chose to lie about calling the ambassador that makes it problematic.
That's not true. When it was first reported, David Ignatius at the Washington Post...
We could debate about the Logan Act all we want to, but why would you cover it up?
When it was
covered it up.
Right.
Michael Cohen covered it up.
Have you guys take this outside. I did find it fascinating. We played those clips earlier about how depressed and deflated some of the commentators, particularly on MSNBC, looked on the Flynn business. So John Kelly, I mean, it seems like there've been a year of stories. He's out the door. He's toast. He's a dead man walking. Well, yesterday, President Trump confirmed the latest round of stories. The general will be leaving as White House Chief of Staff this month. Let me read to you from Washington Post News story, Molly. How much difference can any White House Chief of Staff make with the headstrong, impulsive, and mercurial president who often governs by impulse and tweet, is uninterested in reading lengthy briefings, and is happiest at his raucous rallies? So according to that, it doesn't matter who's Chief of Staff.
Was that a news story or an opinion?
Yeah, it was, actually.
That's a surprising amount of opinion for a news story. But this is one of these things that people have been so interested in when Kelly is going to depart. We've heard this dozens of times, and now apparently it's finally happening. And like a stopped clock, sometimes it ends up being
It
right.
feels kind of anticlimactic because his demise, his professional demise, has been predicted so many times. And of course, it was only over the summer that the president came out and said he will be staying through 2020. And we all said, well, yeah, maybe. I mean, this is a guy who was fired so many times in the press, but clearly their relationship had deteriorated. And that's why it doesn't feel as dramatic to me as it would otherwise.
No, I don't think it's dramatic at all. I think the president does have the ability to pick his chief of staff. I think it's ironic that if you looked at some tweets from 8 years ago, in the third year of Obama's term, President Trump criticized Obama for having 3 chief of staffs 3 years in.
It looks a little different when you're behind the big desk. And Sarah, let's close with this New York Times story, an investigative piece on 2 women, let's put them up on the screen, who worked at the president's golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey. They both say that they are illegal immigrants. One said she made his bed, she cleaned his clothes, that he was kind and gave her a $100 tip on occasion, but that she was offended by his anti-immigrant rhetoric. Is that story big enough? Is it fair game?
I think it plays into a narrative that President Trump is using this immigration debate as part of a political plug, but he doesn't actually feel so much strongly about these immigrants. I mean,
except that he didn't know. The story says that he didn't have direct knowledge that they were. I mean, they faked their papers.
Yes.
And couldn't you investigate any business and find some illegal immigrants?
That's of course, but has the president come out and saying, I completely feel awful about this, this is such a big deal? He hasn't said anything, and I think the reason is because he doesn't think it's that big of a deal that he had illegal immigrants working at his golf club in Bedminster. I'm from New Jersey. I grew up close to that golf club. I mean, there are a lot of illegal immigrants and people that come through New Jersey and then go on to get papers, so it's not the most uncommon story. Mm-hmm. I just think it plays into a narrative that President Trump is going hard after immigrants, illegal immigrants, but at the same time, when this happens, he hasn't really tweeted anything about it.
The White House has not responded. All right.